everyone, welcome to today's video. I am going to talk about a topic today that I think is a good follow-up for the video I just did yesterday. If you missed yesterday's video, I was talking about how long it takes between kids. So if your goat is having more than one baby, what should you expect between babies in terms of time? And one of the things that people worry about is that if it takes too long, that the kid is going to be born dead. And the reality is that kid does not die during pushing until like 6 to 8 hours after the goat starts pushing. And I don't mean like she's looking at you funny. I mean like she is flat out throwing her head back, mouth wide open, screaming, pushing as hard as she can, like trying to push out a bowling ball. And so many times you see people on social media saying, you know, oh, if only I had gotten the kid out sooner, it was completely perfect. The kid was not perfect. So there are a lot of kids that are not born perfect. And I know we all want perfect kids, but we can't all get perfect kids because that's just not reality. So somebody asked me recently, how can I get 0% mortality? And it's like, you would have to be God. That's it. Like, because every kid is not perfect. So I want to talk about some of the reasons that kids are born dead. Because it's really sad how many people beat themselves up thinking that they could have saved a kid when they couldn't. Like there was nothing that they could have done to save the kid. And then in the future, it makes them paranoid and they do things they shouldn't do and they intervene when they shouldn't intervene because they've got an unrealistic goal. So the first thing I want to talk about in terms of beating yourself up is to give you an example of how I personally was beating myself up a few years ago. Because one of the reasons that kids might die is that if they are born and the sac doesn't break, they can suffocate. So you can have a 100% completely normal, healthy kid born. And then this is usually an issue with first fresheners because a lot of times they just have no idea what is going on. They're just like, ah, I'm dying. And then the kid comes out and they're just like, oh, thank goodness that's over. And they don't even notice that there's a kid back there. And so that's one reason that like it's important to be there for your first fresheners is just in case the kid is born and the sac doesn't break. And this isn't very common, but it does happen. And so one day I was doing chores and a goat was in labor and I was in and out of the barn and I was passing by the kidding pen on a very regular basis, like every 5 or 10 minutes. And I walk in and there is a dead kid and it was in the sack. And I was so mad at myself. I was like, oh my gosh, if only I had been here, I could have saved it. It suffocated in the sack because the umbilical cord, and this is the thing, as long as the baby is inside mom, the umbilical cord is giving it all of the oxygen and nutrients that it needs. I have heard people say they're afraid the baby's going to suffocate inside mom. It's not going to suffocate inside mom because it's getting its oxygen from the umbilical cord, just like it's been getting oxygen for the last 5 months from the day it was conceived. So it's not going to suffocate inside mom if you don't hurry up and get it out. But it can suffocate once it comes out. The umbilical cord breaks 99% of the time. The cord breaks as the kid is being born. And once that cord is broken, then it's up to the lungs to take in oxygen. And if they can't do that because it's wrapped up in saran wrap, then it will die. And it will die very fast. Like within less than a minute, it is going to be dead. So what happened was I found this kid and beating myself up like crazy because thinking like, this is a perfectly healthy kid that suffocated because I wasn't there to tear the sac off so that it could breathe. And you guys know, if you've been following me for very long, you know I'm very much into data. And so whenever we've got dead animals, if we, butcher goats or whatever, or if one dies, old age, whatever, I usually remove the liver and have the liver sent in to have it tested. Because a long time ago, we used to have a problem with copper deficiency, and things change on the farm. We don't have a problem with copper deficiency anymore. That's a talk for another day. And this is why you got to keep track of this stuff. You can't just make guesses and eyeball it and ask somebody on Facebook, to look into their crystal ball and tell you what's wrong with your goats. So we sent in her liver, and because I was just thinking like, wow, this will be a great opportunity to see like what the mineral levels are in a healthy newborn that was born, on my farm. She had a twin sister who was 100% healthy. She actually, this was a few years ago. So her sister grew up to be a healthy goat and a great mama, and she's having babies on the farm now. And so this one little doe that I thought suffocated, I sent in her liver, and I wanted to pull up the test results from the lab to tell you guys, because they're just, I always feel like I'm exaggerating if I try to remember them, because it's like, was it really that high? Oh gosh, yeah, it was actually worse. So anyway, the first thing is a normal iron level for a goat, according to the lab, is 125 to 800. Hers was 11,778. That is over 10 times the highest normal. It's way, way into critical territory. So like that's like some kind of iron toxicity. Basically, like there's no way a goat can survive if their iron level is 11,778 when it's not supposed to be more than 800. But that's not all. Her manganese level was also at a critical level. It was at 44.76, and manganese is supposed to be no higher than 23. Like manganese should be between 5 and 23, and hers was 44. So her manganese level was at a critical level, which means that's a goat can't survive with their manganese at that level. And it was almost twice as high as what is at the high end of normal. But that's not all. Her copper and her molybdenum were also high. And so this goat, and the thing I find really crazy about that, like, I don't think you would ever see that in a live goat, because molybdenum is a copper antagonist. So if a goat consumed enough molybdenum to have a high level of molybdenum, they would be copper deficient. And this goat had high copper. So anyway, this was like so confusing. I contacted one of the vet professors I know and asked, like, what do I do with this? And he said, there's nothing you can do with it. Like, clearly this kid was not viable, but we don't know why. Like this, she should have had a necropsy, like I tell you guys that all the time. If somebody says, why did my goat die? I'm like, well, if you really want to know, you got to get a necropsy. And I would take it to a university lab where a real pathologist can do it, and not just your local vet. Some local vets can do a fantastic job, but some of them just kind of fly by the seat of their pants and will just say things. Like, they won't even do the necropsy sometimes. They'll just say something like, oh, she was in labor too long, that's all. And I've seen that, unfortunately, and it is so frustrating because you could get some really good information from the necropsy. And I really wish I had done it, but the kid looked 100% normal on the outside. Like, it looked completely normal. And that was a really great reminder to me. Don't beat yourself up, like, and think that, like, you could have, been the hero and saved this kid if you'd been there when it was born, because it wasn't going to survive. If it was alive when it was born, it may have already been dead before it was born. When we had a schistosomus that was delivered by C-section, that little guy must have been alive right up until mom went into labor, because he was like 3.5 pounds. And a schistosomus, the nickname for that is an inside out kid. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It looks like somebody folded him over backwards. Like, they folded the back half of his spine over the front half of his spine, and all of his guts popped out. Like, it looked very bizarre. But he was huge. So, like, he was continuing to grow all the way up to 3.5 pounds. Like, that's about average for my kids. So he must have just died, like, within the last day or two before mom went into labor. As crazy as, like, his anatomy was, mom was keeping him alive while he was still, tucked inside there. So this is why I'm telling y'all, like, trust your does' bodies. They know what they're doing most of the time. Yeah, they make mistakes. Like, somehow a schistosomus got created by that doe. But she kept growing him, right up until the end. So don't beat yourself up, and never assume that, the doe is just in labor too long or something like that. And I'm saying never assume. Like, if she was pushing for 8 hours before you could get the C-section, well, then, yeah, it probably was because she was in labor too long. But like 30 minutes, even a couple hours, like that is not a problem. And you remember, you always have time to call a vet. And don't believe people who tell you that you can raise goats without a vet, because there will be times that you need antibiotics. If you are intervening in a goat's birth, she's probably going to need antibiotics so she doesn't get an infection, and they're by prescription now. So you need a vet to give you a prescription for that. You're going to need diagnostics, that you're not going to be able to do yourself. It's very easy to send in a liver to a lab. That's nothing. But you need, there are diagnostics, like you need blood work and stuff sometimes to get a definitive diagnosis on a goat. And you can do some of that yourself, but some of it, it's better to have a vet do it. And sometimes you need a vet just to tell you what you're doing. Like, I'm not talking about like testing your goat's copper levels and stuff like that. Or, well, actually you don't test copper with blood, selenium. But you need diagnostics. You might need x-rays. You might need a cast. Please don't try to do your own casts. So it is really important to find a vet, and you may not find one like next door, like you have with your, like you've got, like, every town has lots of dog and cat vets. You might have to drive a couple hours to get to a goat vet, and that is completely acceptable. I have driven 3 goats 2 hours to the university for C-sections. And of those 3 goats that went to the university for C-sections, one of them had live kids. 2 other goats that wound up at the university for kidding assistance, they all had live kids. So, and the schistosomus was not viable. So that doesn't count. Like, they could have done the C-section before she went into labor, and that kid would have been dead. So that one does not count at all. So of the 5 goats that I have taken to the university for kidding assistance, only 1 had kids that were born dead because the goat had been in labor for so long. So that is not something to panic about. If it's only been like 30 minutes or an hour or something. And this is why you need to have a vet, because so that you don't wind up like that other person that I was telling you about who was trying to find a vet to do a C-section after her goat had already been pushing for 2 hours. You don't, and she'd been pulling, like, you don't want to wind up in that situation. And then still she had to drive 3 hours because that was the closest vet she could find to do a C-section. But the doe survived and did fine. And the kid, even with its cantaloupe head, the kid survived, and the swelling did go down, and it looked like a normal, cute little kid in 2 or 3 days. So, anyway, so there are many, many reasons why a kid can be born dead. The other thing too that I want to mention here, we have a whole podcast episode on infectious causes of abortion. So if you have more than one kid born dead, there could be an infection that is causing this. So there's all kinds of infections that goats can have, like chlamydia and Coxiella and all kinds of stuff that can cause intrauterine death. Toxoplasmosis, if you have barn cats, they can give toxoplasmosis to your goats. I met someone years ago who had 16 does. Every single one of them got toxoplasmosis from her cats, and all wound up giving birth to stillborns or kids that died very shortly after birth. And that was how I learned a lot about, like, yeah, if the kids are dead, they are going to be in all kinds of crazy positions. The textbook, actually this textbook over here, you can't see so there's goat medicine. That book actually says that 95% of births require no intervention. And so keep that in mind, that you're probably not going to have to do anything in terms of intervening. Most time your goats are going to know what to do. But if something does go wrong, you need to have a vet that you can call to help with that, because you cannot do your own C-section. You can't do a lot of the crazy stuff that I have seen suggested online. If you think something sounds crazy, it is crazy. And it doesn't matter that somebody online is telling you to do it, because sadly there are trolls. There are people who just want to, be miserable with stuff. So if you've got any questions, feel free to post in the comment section below. Bye for now.